This is a video tutorial showing you steps that I use in order to create what I call an interrupted animation. To get an idea of what I'm talking about, think back to Garishan. When you go into the power control room, there's a plate that you have to step on that makes a cylinder rise. And of course we do that so that we give ourselves enough, I guess it's an emergency power thing, to be able to get power turned on. Well, when the avatar steps onto the plate, the cylinder begins to rise, and when we step off the plate, the cylinder begins to fall. I'm going to show you how to do that here. I've created a blue cylinder that's going to represent my cylinder like they have in Garishan. And I made it, it's about 10 feet tall. And I lowered it down into the ground. Now, the next thing I need to do, besides give it page information, is I got to make it an animated object. So, using my component manager, I call up new, miscellaneous, animation, and I assign that, and then I assign that component to the cylinder, and I renamed it to CYL rise animation. Now in the rollouts for the animation, we don't need to do anything because it's not going to auto start when we first link in, and the animation itself is not going to loop, nor is it a global animation. Once I've done that, I then need to go to the graphic editor and select track view dope sheet. We go down and select our cylinder and then click on tracks, note track, add. So we have to add a note track. Once we've added the note track, we then click on this button here, which is add keys. And you click at the start frame, which was 0, and in my particular case here, the stop frame is at frame 300. And then I go in, you right click on it, make sure your frames are set up right, and I use the following keys. I said sil move at start, so that's my starting key, and the ending key is at frame 300, so 10 seconds, and I put sil move at end. Now we're done with the cylinder, and as you can see, if I move my frame bar here, it goes up and down, up and down. And I wanted 10 seconds because we wanted to have time for things to react when the avatar does stuff. Now, for the plate, I just put in a pinkish red plane here. And other than giving it a page info component, I haven't done anything else to it. There's no reason for me to do anything. Where the action happens is these boxes here. Looks like there's only one here, but there's actually two. I cloned one on top of the other. And basically what we're making here are two detector regions, or region sensors. I'm going to use one region sensor to kick things off and to be triggered whenever the avatar enters it. And as you can see, we call up the component manager, new, detector, region sensor. I assigned it to this box. And for those of you, because I've had some people ask me occasionally, how did you get a translucent like that? Well, with an object, any object selected, like here I'll do it to the cylinder, you can right click after you've selected it and go to properties and go to where it says rendering control, visibility. 1.0 will make it solid. If you lower it, like here 0.5 and then click on OK, it makes it translucent. I'll set it back to 1.0 here. Go back to being solid. Anyway, just a little tip. Now, I've made this box, this first box, a region sensor, and I called it plate trigger region. And the region sensor that I gave it is called start trigger cylinder. In the rollouts for the region sensor, I put a check mark where it says trigger on entering volume, but only there. In a lot of cases, we've always put a check mark here and on exiting, simply to just detect whether the avatar has entered a region, is in a region. Well, here I only wanted to trigger or be detected when the avatar walks into it, not when they leave. The second region, and as you can see I clicked, but it's right on top of the other one. This box, I also put the page information component, and I also gave it a region sensor component. This one I called exit trigger cylinder. And as you can see on the rollout for this region sensor, I have a check mark where it says trigger on exiting volume. only. So the second region will detect when we leave the box, but not when we enter it. Let's go back to the first region sensor here. Now, the next step is to create 3 responders. And you create responders by clicking on New, Logic, Responder. And I put all 3 of them on this region sensor. I could have put them on the ground, on the plate down here, the cylinder. I could have put them on anything. As long as they're attached to an object that gets exported, it doesn't matter where you put them. But so that I could keep track of them, I put them all 3 on the same object here. Now, I decided to call the first responder Start Cylinder Raise Responder. This is the responder that's going to kick everything off. The second one I named Stop and Drop because that's exactly what the responder is going to do. It's going to stop the cylinder from rising and make it drop. The third responder I called it Stop and Raise, which is exactly what it's going to do. It's going to stop the cylinder from dropping and make it raise. Let's go back to the first one that kicks everything off though. Start Cylinder Raise Responder. You look in the rollout, the detector is the sensor region itself, the one that we enter, will trigger it. And I gave it the following commands. I said set the animation of the cylinder to forward, play the animation, and I also told it shut yourself off. Basically I told it to disable itself. In other words, once this responder starts things, I don't want it to interfere with anything else. And the way you disable responders is you click on Add, Enable/Disable, and you click on, in this case, it's Responder. Now, I know it says enabled here, but what really controls whether it's being enabled or disabled is this right here. If you put a check mark there, it turns on a responder. If you remove the check mark, it turns the responder off. And so that's exactly what this responder does. It sets the animation of the cylinder excuse me, forward. It then plays that forward animation and it turns itself off. Next, let's go to the stop and drop responder. What this responder is going to do is it's going to stop the cylinder's rising animation and make it drop. Now, we want this to happen when we step back off the plate. Well, of course, the plate doesn't really do anything. It's just there for show. But what we really want to do is have a region. Remember that second region I made that triggers on exit only? Well, if you walk off the plate, you'll be exiting that region. So I made the exit region sensor the detector for this responder. Now, remember, I had you turn off the first responder. What we're going to do in this one is actually turn on a responder. We're going to turn on the third responder, the stop and raise responder. And as you can see, I have my check mark in the enable. The next thing we did was we say animation stop. If you click on add, you go to animation and you say stop. So it's going to stop the animation that was playing. Then I told it, now set this animation backwards, which of course in this case is the cylinder going down, and to play that animation. So that's what's going to happen when you step out of this region. This responder will do this. It'll turn on the third responder. It will stop the animation of the cylinder rising. It'll make the animation set backwards, and it'll play it backwards. Now let's go to that third responder, stop and raise. The detector is going to be that enter region. In other words, the region sensor when we enter it, because it looks like we're stepping back on the plate. So that's why we want the detector to be the start trigger region again. And in this one, and as you'll notice, there is no enabled way down here at the bottom. That's because we want this responder to start off as off. We don't want it on. The start cylinder raise, the start cylinder raise responder is what starts it. But once we start it, we need a different responder to control it. Here's why. First command in the third one is, again, animation stop. Okay. So it's going to stop the cylinder dropping. It's going to set the animation forward again, and then we're going to play that animation. So what happens is when we enter the region a second time or more, what will happen is the game will detect that because we're entering the region here, and it'll say, oh, stop the animation, whatever it's doing, set it forward, and then start playing it again. If you've done all this, then you're ready to export and give it a try. Okay, if you followed the steps in the tutorial correctly, you'll notice that when I take my avatar and step onto the plate, the cylinder begins to rise. If I suddenly step off of it, it stops and drops. Step on it, it rises. Stops and drops, stops and rises. Now I can go ahead and let it rise all the way up here, and if I step off the plate, it'll begin to fall again. And that's it.